Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Okay, so this will be a spoiler talk video, which means I will get to be a little less critical and a little less formal. And I can just talk about things that I liked and didn't like about this movie without any restrictions. So full spoiler warning is in effect for this video, of course.
You have the luxury of not knowing what I know.
First off, I just want to say there's this weird thing going on social media. Well, I guess it's not really weird on social media, but people are taking sides and making it seem like if you are a fan of the Snyderverse, that you can't be a fan of the Batman. Which I honestly think is a crock of shit. I very much would love for them to restore the Snyderverse, but I also am very curious to see where Matt Reeves' Batman world goes. I don't deal in absolutes. There's aspects to things that I like, and there's aspects to the same thing that I don't like.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
I'm not trying to limit myself just to prove a point. I can have my cake and eat it too. As for the Batman, it very much hints at future stories in this world. We're most likely going to get a sequel, and we already know that we're going to get spin-off shows on HBO Max. But in all honesty, if this movie was left as a standalone story a la the Joker, then I think that would be okay too. It's technically considered a Elseworlds tale anyway, and it's not really connected to anything else. And that's something that I actually really like about it, and it's kind of refreshing. I've grown tired of the connected universes and crossovers that we've become accustomed to seeing with comic book movies. For once, I just want them to tell me a self-contained story, and Matt Reeves does that.
Jesus fucking Christ, it's about time!
One of the highlights for this movie for me is the first few minutes of the film, which set up this world perfectly. We are instantly introduced to the Zodiac-like Riddler character who is stalking and killing his first victim. A lot of people aren't open to the reinterpretation of characters the way that I am, and there's going to be traditionalists who do not like this version of the Riddler. But I just looked at it as this was very similar to how Nolan reinvented Bane for his world. And I felt like Matt Reeves was doing the same thing for Riddler here. This version of Riddler is what makes the most sense in the world that Matt Reeves created.
That makes sense.
This is very much a Gotham that is at its absolute worst, and it should be. Which brings me to the introduction of Robert Pattinson's Batman. And we see a group of thugs basically harassing this citizen in the subway. This felt like one of those random interactions that you come across in the Arkham games, and Batman shows up, beats the piss out of all of them, and is basically building his reputation by doing so. Robert Pattinson's Batman is somehow very familiar to me, and also very different than any other version of Batman that we've got. He's early in his career, he doesn't have everything figured out, he just has a goal, even if he doesn't quite know how to achieve that goal. They are definitely allowing room for growth in that character, and I can appreciate that. I did take some issue with Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne not really having his own identity. When we see this character, we are used to two different sides of one personality, basically. But in this movie, he's basically the same guy in both roles. And on the one rare instance that he does go out in public as Bruce Wayne in this movie, he still can't help but brood and sulk in that role.
Now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
And I think it's because he hasn't quite found a way to master those emotions yet. And this was very much a creative choice done by Robert Pattinson and Matt Reeves. Especially after hearing Pattinson once describe his version of Bruce Wayne as not really knowing where Bruce Wayne stops and where Batman begins. That makes a lot of sense, actually. So I am a little bit more forgiving of the overly emo Bruce Wayne than I was last night when I first reviewed this, because now I know that they are actually building to something if this story continues. Everything about his Batman persona, however, is spot on. Everything from his voice to his suit to his presence all worked for me.
Because it's all part of the plan.
The length at which they go into Catwoman's story was actually kind of surprising to me. In fact, she gets a little bit more character development than even Batman does. She is a cat burglar just like we come to know her as, but she's also a scorned woman who's really been dicked over a lot. So you can kind of understand her animosity towards the wealthy, especially after Carmine Falcone is revealed to be her father. I also was not expecting Carmine Falcone to be such a huge part of this movie. He basically serves as the secondary main villain of the story. He's a piece of shit, and there's reasons for both Catwoman and Batman to want to bring him down. And this creates that iconic dynamic between Batman and Catwoman, where they have different philosophies about how to handle things, so they form this uneasy alliance, and they really nailed that relationship, I think. And just to be clear, I really enjoyed Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman as well.
She got a great ass.
Colin Farrell's Penguin was probably the standout of the movie for me. Again, he's a reinterpretation of Penguin, but somehow still stays true to the character anyway. Instead of making him a more distinguished businessman, he's basically a mob enforcer. And he has these very funny Italian mannerisms. He's like, "Hey, easy, sweetheart."
Now go home and get your fucking shine box.
I felt that James Gordon was also well utilized. I like the fact that they make us believe in the relationship between him and Batman without really seeing the origins of that relationship, which is another big positive for this movie because it's not an origin story at all. Batman is pretty much established. Gotham is pretty much established. Everything that's going on in this city has already been going on for some time now, and we are basically just dropped into it at the same time the Riddler murders begin. And yes, this world, this version of Gotham, is 100% one of my favorite things about the movie. It's rain-soaked, it's dark, it's dangerous, it's corrupt. It feels like a combination of the city from Seven, the city from Blade Runner, and at the same time a bit of the Arkham games. Just a full-on, moody, atmospheric vibe that fits Batman perfectly.
Just a sick world we're living in. Sick people.
This might be one of the best, if not the best, Gotham we've seen on screen to date. I didn't mention the score in my spoiler-free review, so I'll mention it now. It basically sets the tone for the entire movie. The Riddler's plan is basically the plot element that drives the story. His plan is to expose the corruption that allows powerful men in Gotham to stay that way. And this tracks all the way back to the Waynes, who are revealed to have dark secrets of their own. I initially took issue with the once again deconstructing of the character of Thomas Wayne and painting him in a less than flattering light. At first they make him seem like a greedy dickhead who gets somebody killed, but once you hear Alfred's side of the story and his one and only memorable scene, it actually relays a decent message about how even the best people make mistakes. It's all the more relevant because we live in a world that is constantly punishing people for things that they did in their past. It's called cancel culture. So the more that I think about it, this reveal was actually quite relevant.
Message!
And it's done in a way that's not heavy-handed and over the top. It's subtle and you can choose to see it or not to see it. The conclusion to this story comes when the Riddler kills Falcone and he's captured by the police. And he reveals to Batman in a classic Batman interrogation scene in Arkham Asylum that there is in fact more to his plan. This leads to him detonating bombs that cause the sea to flood the city. Again, this was very reminiscent of the fear toxin cloud from Arkham Knight. And to me, this movie could have ended with Riddler and Arkham and Batman rescuing people in the flood. But in the one aspect of this movie that still really doesn't work for me, Riddler's followers dress like him and start picking people off with sniper rifles. How the Joker got media backlash and a scene like this alone didn't get this movie backlash, I'll never understand. My issue with the scene, however, is that it feels very familiar, like I've seen this before.
Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
The psycho who amassed a following, and he somehow convinces them to kill for him in his absence. It's actually very reminiscent to the ending of The Joker. He inspired all these people to act in his name. Even if in that movie it was a bit more inadvertent. And this part of the movie just felt a bit tacked on to me, and it wasn't all that well executed in my opinion. And honestly, if you would have cut it out, made the movie about 15 minutes shorter, I don't think it would have been affected all that much. And then we come to a possible tease for a future movie, which comes within the movie and not in the end credits, which again is refreshing. And we see that Riddler's next door neighbor in his Arkham Asylum cell is in fact the Joker. Or at least it's insinuated that it's the Joker based on his laugh, but we don't actually see his face. Some people might take issue with the Joker being used again, when there's other lesser used villains that people have been clamoring to see. It might be a tad bit too soon to get really excited, considering the Joker just happened in 2019.
Get what you fucking deserve!
But the reality is that you can't have a Batman without the Joker. It's inevitable. At the very least, I do like that this will be Matt Reeves' interpretation of the Joker, and not an already pre-established version of the Joker being shoehorned into the movie. Overall, my feelings on the Batman are pretty much the same. There's a lot to love about this movie, and some nitpicky things that I didn't like so much. I think from a critical standpoint, it's not perfect, but from a fan perspective, it gives you a lot of what you're looking for. All in all, I think it's definitely worth a watch if you're a lifelong Batman fan like myself, and especially if you're craving more variety in your comic book movies, which this movie does provide. If you've already made up your mind that this interpretation just isn't for you, then that's okay too. But I believe that Batman is one of those characters that's actually been treated really well, Justice League aside, and I'm pretty thankful for that as a huge Batman fan. So have you seen the Batman? If you have, let me know what you thought about it in the comments down below. As always, please like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, and I'll see you next time right here on Real Shift. Thanks for watching. Peace out.
Y'all be cool. Right on.